Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing our axle. Now to do this, you're going to want to have your front end safely raised and supported so the wheel's off the ground. After that, you're going to go ahead and remove all of your lug nuts. Sometimes these will be a 19 or possibly a 21. It depends on your application. Remove the wheel. The next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and remove the axle nut right here. If you are using an air gun, this should zip right off using a 36mm socket. If you're using a ratchet, you might notice that it wants to spin. If that's the case, you can either have somebody hold the brake so it does not spin, or you can put a bar going across like this down to the ground to prevent it from spinning. Either way, let's use our 36 to remove that nut. Set that aside. The next thing we're going to do is follow that axle in right to where it connects onto the front differential. Looking at it, you can see that there's a whole bunch of 15mm headed bolts that hold it on. Let's go ahead and remove all of them. Inspect each of your bolts as you remove them. Okay, just double check, make sure you've removed all of those mounting bolts. The next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and separate that axle. So I'm going to use my pry bar, carefully get in between this area, and just gently pry it apart. The next thing that we're going to have to do is go ahead and bring up this lower control arm a little bit. Looking at it, you can see that it's down at a severe angle, and it's going to make it so the axle gets jammed as we start removing it out and through this way. Now let's go ahead and jack this up. Now let's go ahead and reach underneath that control arm. We're going to grab onto the axle and go ahead and pull it towards the side here. Essentially so it's making no contact with that front differential. Now at this point we can come outside here. We're going to go ahead and push that axle a little bit. You should see it starting to come through. Give it a little tug. Now the next thing we're going to do is move along to removing the lower shock mounting. For that I'm going to use a 19mm socket on the bolt side and a 19mm on the nut. Go ahead and remove that bolt. Go ahead and take that nut off of there. If you got any washers, take those out of the way as well. We're going to go ahead and get this bolt right out of here. Sometimes you just have to apply a little bit of pressure underneath the control arm so that it's taking the pressure off of the shock. Inspect your bolt, set it aside. Now the next thing we need to do is go ahead and separate the bottom of the shock from the control arm. I'm just going to use a pry bar, carefully get in between and separate the two. Go ahead and pull that to the side a little bit. Now let's go ahead and raise up this control arm so it's in as close to a ride height position as possible. Okay, let's go ahead and pull out that axle. And there it is, friends. Okay, so now that we have the axle out of there, we need to do a couple things before we go ahead and put in the new one. The first thing we're going to do is pay attention to this area, which is part of the axle that goes into the differential. You want to make sure this is clean and free of any of this debris that goes along the area where the axle is going to mount. You don't necessarily need to worry so much about this inner portion here. It's just going to be kind of a hollow area, but especially along this outer ridge where those bolts are supposed to go. Go ahead and sand them down. Once you have it sanded down, go ahead and hit it with some parts cleaner. Try to get it inside of all of those mounting bolt holes. While that area is drying, let's also move out to this area right here. Inside this area is where the splines are, where that axle is going to go through. So you want to make sure it's clean and free of any debris or even rust that's in there. Go ahead and hit it with a little brush, and then just hit it with some parts cleaner. Once you have that thoroughly cleaned down, let's continue on with some copper never sees. We're going to go ahead and coat the splined area inside the bearing, and then also on that differential where the axle is going to sit. Now we're replacing this axle because we had a torn boot. If you're dealing with the same issue, you want to make sure you clean up any of the residual grease that's in the area. Nasty. Make sure there's none on those brakes. Super important. Okay friends, now it's time to install our brand new axle. Now let's go ahead and carefully slide this up and in here. While we're doing this entire process, you want to be super careful not to damage either of your CV boots. Slide that right in. We can line up this top part with the differential. Sometimes you just give it a little spin, give it a little wiggle. Should want to make its way in. All right, let's line up those bolt holes and start in our mounting bolts. Once you have your bolt holes lined up, go ahead and start putting in all of your mounting bolts. Once each of them are started, we can start snugging them up. Now that each of them are started in, let's continue on by snugging them up. When we do this, you don't want to go around in a circle. We're going to start with one bolt over here. Go ahead and spin this axle so it's completely 180 degrees, and go ahead and snug up that bolt. After that, we'll just continue on with a crisscross manner. All right, now just make sure they're all tight. All right, so now it's going to be time to go ahead and get the shock back in there. I'm just going to take my pry bar, carefully press up against it, and put it into position. Okay, let's get that down in there. Now we can go ahead and put in our mounting bolt. Get that started. Just going to slide it right on through. With the bolt through, let's go ahead and put on our washer, our locking washer, and then our nut. So now that we have that on there, let's go ahead and bottom this out. Once you have it snug, go ahead and torque this bolt to 66 foot-pounds. Now we can get our jack out from under here. Now we're going to go ahead and put on the axle nut. Typically for this, I use a little bit of red thread locker. Obviously the nut does come with a locker already on it, so you don't necessarily have to worry about that if you don't have the thread locker. We'll go ahead and put this on by hand with a ratchet, bottom it out, and then when we torque this, we're going to torque it to 184 foot-pounds. Now with this back closer to the ground, we can go ahead and torque this axle nut. Now when we go ahead and put it on, it's a good idea to just put a bar going across like this down to the ground. It's going to prevent it from spinning on you while you go ahead and tighten this to 184 foot-pounds. Let's grab our wheel. Now with the wheel on there, let's go ahead and put on all of our lug nuts. Once they're all started, we can bottom them out, get the wheel back on the ground, and then we'll torque these to manufacturer specification. Now with the wheel safely back on the ground, we can go ahead and torque these to 120 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friends, we got the axle in there. What's left to do now? Now typically you're going to want to make sure that you take it for a road test. Listen for any funny noises. After that, get it safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.